Hello everyone, welcome back to our lecture series on discourse analysis. In the last lecture, I provided you with an introduction to discourse grammar. We asked questions such as, what is discourse grammar? How discourse grammar is different from other traditions of grammar in linguistics? How grammar is analyzed from a discourse perspective, and why discourse grammar is useful. So in today's lecture, I'm going to talk about cohesion. So cohesion is one of the topics that has been extensively discussed in discourse grammar. So as usual, this lecture is based on discourse analysis and introduction by Brian Partridge. There is a chapter in this book titled Discourse Grammar. So I would strongly encourage you to read this chapter in conjunction with this lecture. And also, as the discussion goes on, we will be using other resources as well. So let's start off with a definition of cohesion. So what is cohesion? So this definition we are looking at comes from Halliday and Hassan, 1976. The concept of cohesion is a semantic one. It refers to relations of meaning that exist within the text, and that defines it as text. So there are two things that I would like to highlight in this definition. The first thing is cohesion is a semantic property. So it is related to the way the text conveys meaning. And the second thing is cohesion is a defining property of a text. So cohesion is a property that determines whether a group of sentences can be considered a text or not. So let's look at an example to understand what this means. So this example also comes from Halliday and Hassan, 1976. Wash and cook 6 cooking apples, put them into a fireproof dish. So this is a short text which consists of 2 sentences. So in the second sentence, the pronoun them refers back to something mentioned in the first sentence. You all would agree that it refers to the noun phrase 6 cooking apples. Through this reference, the writer has established a relation between these 2 sentences. So there is a link established between these 2 sentences. So reference gives cohesion to this text. So these 2 sentences together form a text. As Halliday and Hassan illustrate here, any 2 sentences would not create a text. A text gets created when sentences are interrelated. So in this case, reference is the strategy the writer has used to create this interrelation. So this is another definition of cohesion coming from Baker 2008. Let's first read Baker's definition of cohesion. Cohesion is the network of lexical, grammatical, and other relations that provide links between various parts of a text. Cohesion is a surface relation. It connects together the actual words and expressions that we can see or hear. So this definition also introduces cohesion as a network building operation in a text. Cohesion establishes ties among various elements, clauses, and different parts of a text. Also, it is a surface relation. What do we mean by a surface relation? If you carefully observe a text, you can identify evidence of cohesion or various cohesive devices the writer has used in the text. So now, let's look at an example to understand how these lexical and grammatical relations work in a text. Once again, this is a very short text which consists of 2 sentences. COVID-19 is a virus. It has brought the world to a standstill. So understanding the second sentence of this text involves interpreting what the pronoun it refers to in this text. So what does it refer to in this text? So the most natural interpretation is that it refers to a virus in the first sentence. So the writer has established a connection or relation between a noun phrase in the first sentence and a pronoun in the second sentence. So the strategy used here is called reference. So reference is a cohesive strategy writers commonly use to establish relations among various elements or clauses in a text. So here is another example. In this, once again, we see 2 sentences forming a text. And these 2 sentences are interrelated. And that is why we can consider this as a short text. I watched the entire cricket match yesterday. The game was very exciting. So how does the writer establish the connection between these 2 sentences in this situation? Well, the writer uses a different strategy. That is by choosing a word which is synonymous with the match, a word given in the first sentence. So game and match are synonyms. So by using a synonym in the second sentence, the writer establishes a connection between or relation between the 2 sentences. The 2 sentences are once again related. So they together form a text. So understanding this text once again involves making a relation between these 2 words or interpreting match and game as synonyms. So we define cohesion as the network of relations that create a text. So that is the network of surface relations. So this network is created when the writer uses or the speaker uses various cohesive devices. So how is cohesion different from coherence, which is another important concept in discourse analysis? Both concern the way stretches of language are connected to each other. In the case of cohesion, stretches of language are connected to each other by virtue of lexical and grammatical dependencies. In the case of coherence, they are connected by virtue of conceptual or meaning dependencies as perceived by language users. So cohesion refers to the network of surface relations which link words and expressions and other parts of a text. But coherence refers to the network of conceptual relations that may underlie a text. Cohesion is something that is visible, that you can observe in the text easily. Because in order to achieve cohesion, writers use a variety of cohesive devices. So we have looked at one strategy, which is reference. And another strategy is using synonyms, which is lexical cohesion. Reference is generally described as grammatical cohesion. So when we look at a text, we can identify various cohesive devices the writer or the speaker has used. So coherence refers to conceptual relations formed by a reader or a hearer in a particular context. So coherence refers to how the text becomes meaningful to the reader or the hearer. So another difference between cohesion and coherence is that cohesion is objective. You can easily analyze different strategies the writer has used to achieve cohesion in a text. But coherence is subjective because it involves the judgment of a hearer or a speaker in a particular context. Because it refers to how a text becomes meaningful to a reader or a listener in a particular context. So summarizing our discussion, we can say that cohesion is a surface relation. You can easily identify cohesion through various cohesive devices the writer or the speaker has used in a particular text. Coherence refers to the conceptual relations formed by a listener or a reader in a particular context. So those conceptual relations can be subjective as they can differ from reader to reader or listener to listener. So now let's look at an example to understand the difference between cohesion and coherence. So read this text. My daughter hates pizza. She wants it whenever we go to Colombo. So what do you think about this text? Does this text make sense to you? Well, you may say, no, it doesn't make sense. Why doesn't it make sense? Is it because this text doesn't have coherence? Or is it because this text doesn't have cohesion? Well, let's look at how this text is created. So this has two sentences. The first sentence is, my daughter hates pizza. The second sentence is, she wants it whenever we go to Colombo. The second sentence begins with the pronoun, which is she. This pronoun refers back to a noun phrase mentioned in the first sentence. So there is a surface relation established in this text using reference. And if you read it carefully, you can also see that there is another relation established between the noun phrase pizza and it. So this text has cohesion. The two sentences are linked using a cohesive device or strategy. But due to the apparent contradiction, the text has no coherence. So the reader is unable to form, or the listener is unable to form, a conceptual relation between the two clauses or sentences in this particular context. So the text has cohesion, but the text lacks coherence. Here is another example to understand how cohesion and coherence can be different. The University of Sri Jayawardenepura is located in Nugegoda. Nugegoda has a cinema. I watched a movie there last month. The film is about a boy who refuses to go to school. School is a place where we receive education. If you carefully observe this text, you can easily identify various cohesive devices the writer has used in this text. You can see that the noun phrase Nugegoda, which is part of the first sentence, is repeated at the beginning of the second sentence. And then the third sentence has there, which refers to a noun phrase in the second sentence, a cinema. And then the third sentence and the fourth sentence of the text are related because there is a chain created through the use of synonyms. Finally, the last two sentences are related because of the repetition of the noun phrase, a school. So the text has a network of relations established through reference, repetition, and the use of synonyms. But one thing that becomes obvious from this text is that cohesive markers alone are not sufficient to create coherence in a text, unless those cohesive markers reflect conceptual relations which make sense. So this once again shows that a text can have cohesion, but it can lack coherence. So what does this text show about coherence? So this is a dialogue taking place between a mother and a daughter. Mother says, "Dear, I think the phone is ringing." Daughter answers, "Mom, I'm in an online class." Mother responds, "Sorry, dear, I didn't know." So this text shows the opposite. We don't see any cohesive devices being used in this text. But still, the text has coherence. So this shows that the role of cohesive devices is to facilitate underlying conceptual relations. But sometimes coherence is possible without evidence of cohesion. So summarizing our discussion to this point, we can say cohesion is the grammatical and lexical linking that holds the text together. Cohesion is of two different kinds: grammatical cohesion and lexical cohesion. Grammatical cohesion refers to the network of relations that we establish in a text using grammatical means. Lexical cohesion, meanwhile, refers to the network of relations established in a text using lexical strategies. So in order to create grammatical cohesion, writers or speakers generally use four different strategies. First is reference. Second is substitution. Third is ellipses. The fourth is conjunctions. And then in order to create lexical cohesion, writers or speakers generally use repetitions, synonyms, antonyms, hypernyms, meronyms, and collocation. So now we are going to talk about the four strategies writers or speakers generally use to achieve grammatical cohesion in a text. So we are going to start off with reference. So there are four different kinds of reference that we are going to talk about. The first one is anaphoric reference. So what is anaphoric reference? If a word or phrase refers back to another word or phrase used earlier in the discourse or earlier in a text, we call it anaphoric reference. So the preceding word is generally called the referent or the antecedent. Now let's look at this text to understand what we mean by anaphoric reference. So this is a quotation coming from Obama's victory speech that we have already talked about in a previous lecture. So let's look at this text to understand how the speaker uses anaphoric reference in this text. A little bit earlier this evening, I received an extraordinarily gracious call from Senator McCain. So in this text, you can see that Obama introduces a character in the first sentence that he produces. That is Senator McCain. And then throughout the text, when he refers to the same person, he uses a pronoun. In the second sentence, he uses the pronoun 3 times. In the third sentence, he uses it once. And then in the last sentence, he is using a phrase created with this. So all these refer to the character that is introduced in the first sentence, Senator McCain. So what generally happens in anaphoric reference is we introduce a character, an entity, or an event in the first instance, and then we refer back to it using a reference. The most common strategy that we use in English and many other languages for reference is the use of third-person pronouns. However, we also can use phrases created with the definite article the, this, these, that, and those. And they also can refer back to something mentioned previously in the text. So here are some more examples to understand anaphoric reference. See whether you can identify anaphoric reference in these examples. The first one goes as, in peace, sons bury their fathers. In war, fathers bury their sons. So in the first sentence, there refers to the noun phrase sons. And in the second part of this quotation, there refers to fathers. So this is anaphoric reference. Now let's look at the second example and see whether you can identify anaphoric reference in the second example. The English Patient is a 1992 novel by Michael Ondaatje. The book follows 4 dissimilar people brought together at an Italian villa during the Italian campaign of World War II. So focus on the second sentence. In the second sentence, the book, the noun phrase, refers to the English patient in the first sentence. So there is an anaphoric reference created between the noun phrase in the first sentence and the noun phrase in the second sentence. Now we are moving to cataphoric reference. So what do we mean by cataphoric reference? Cataphoric reference describes an item which refers to another word or phrase used later in the text. So let's try to understand this by using this example. And while she is no longer with us, I know my grandmother is watching, along with the family that made me who I am. So this is also a quotation from Obama's speech. Now, in order to understand who she refers to in this text, the reader has to look forward. And the referent of the pronoun is mentioned later in the text. And this is the complete opposite of what we saw in the case of anaphoric reference. In anaphoric reference, a word or phrase refers back to another word or phrase mentioned in the text. But in cataphoric reference, a word or phrase refers to something that is later mentioned in the text. Here it is, the book you have always wanted to read. Once again, in order to understand what it refers to, the reader has to look forward. The referent is mentioned later in the text. The third type of reference we talk about is exophoric reference. Exophoric reference looks outside the text to the situation in which the text occurs for the identity of the item being referred to. So let's look at this example to understand this. I know you didn't do this just to win an election, and I know you didn't do it for me. These words that we see here are examples of exophoric reference. In exophoric reference, in order to identify the referent, the reader or listener has to look outside the discourse or has to consider the context in which a particular utterance is made. The referent of an exophora cannot be determined by looking either backward or forward in the text. So in exophoric reference, to determine the reference of a particular word or phrase, the reader or listener has to look outside the text, or he or she has to use the world knowledge and take the context into consideration. So here are some more examples of exophoric reference. In each of these examples, in order to understand the underlying word, you have to know the context in which each utterance is made. That is the characteristic property of exophoric reference. The fourth category of reference is called demonstrative reference. This is also a common strategy that we use to establish and maintain cohesion in a text. So let's look at these two examples to begin with. I often visit Kandy. I have many relatives here. I often visit Kandy. I have many relatives there. If I ask you to describe the difference between these two utterances, you would immediately tell me that the first utterance is made while the speaker is still in Kandy. The second utterance is made when the speaker has left Kandy, or the speaker is somewhere else by the time the utterance is made. So in these two sentences, you have two examples of demonstrative reference. And the words here and there are examples of demonstrative reference. In demonstrative reference, the referent is identified by locating it on a scale of proximity. So words like this, these, here, and now indicate close proximity, while words like that, these, those, and then indicate distance. Now we're going to talk about conjunctions. The use of conjunctions is also crucial in terms of maintaining the cohesion of a text. Conjunctions are commonly used by writers and speakers to establish and maintain cohesion in a text. So what are conjunctions? So conjunctions refer to words such as and, however, finally, and in conclusion that join phrases, clauses, or sections of a text, okay, that they express the logical semantic relationship between them. Now let's look at this example. This has two sentences. It is raining heavily here at the moment. Because of that, my internet connection is unstable. So the writer has used a conjunction here, because of that. And what is this conjunction doing? The conjunction establishes a relation between the two sentences. So there is a cause and effect relation here. It is raining heavily here at the moment. So it is the cause. And my internet connection is unstable is the effect. So using conjunctions, writers or speakers signal to the readers and listeners how they want them to relate what is about to be said to what has already been said in a particular discourse. So in this discourse, how do I want my readers to relate the first sentence to the second sentence? I want my readers to understand the second sentence as the result or the effect of what is mentioned in the first sentence. So this signal is provided to the reader by using a conjunction because of that. So there are different types of conjunctions that we use to establish and maintain cohesion in a text. The first category is additive conjunctions. So this is not an exhaustive list, and these are some examples. Additive conjunctions denote the notion of addition. And also, in addition, furthermore, moreover, besides, likewise, so they indicate the notion of addition. And then the second category includes temporal conjunctions, which denote the notion of time. Then, next, afterwards, after that, finally, at last, at the same time are some examples of temporal conjunctions. So the next category is causal conjunctions. So causal conjunctions generally introduce a cause, a reason, or an explanation for a given action in a discourse. So meanwhile, adversative conjunctions generally introduce opposition or contrast between two statements. Some examples include but, yet, however, instead, on the other hand, nevertheless, at any rate, and as a matter of fact. Next, we are going to talk about another strategy. Writers and speakers generally use to establish and maintain cohesion in a text, and that is ellipsis. Remember that ellipsis is also a strategy generally associated with grammatical cohesion. What is ellipsis? With ellipsis, some essential element is omitted from the text and can be recovered by referring to a preceding element in the text. Ellipsis may involve the omission of a noun or a noun group, a verb or verbal group, or a clause. So in simple terms, what ellipsis means is the omission of a certain item in a discourse. So what has been omitted can be recovered from the discourse context. So let's look at an example of ellipsis. This is a dialogue taking place between an announcer and a caller on a radio program. The announcer asks, Gary, what did you want to say to Alison tonight? Caller says, that I'm very sorry for the fight we had the other night. Announcer asks, what was that over? Caller says, something rather silly actually. And then announcer intervenes. They usually are, aren't they? Yeah, and that I love her very much and we will have to stick it through, you know. If you concentrate on the caller's contribution in this dialogue, you can see that the caller leaves many things unsaid in the discourse. But we don't have a problem in understanding what the caller says because it can be recovered from the context. So if the caller had answered the announcer's question in a complete sentence, he would have said, I want to say that I'm very sorry for the fight we had the other night. And here it was over something rather silly, actually. Yeah, they usually are silly. I want to say that. Even though these elements are omitted in the discourse, the text becomes meaningful to the reader. So the strategy used here is ellipsis. Ellipsis is of different types. One of them is called nominal ellipsis. The next category is verbal ellipsis. If what is omitted or deleted is some part of the verb phrase, we call it verbal ellipsis. Sometimes what is deleted or omitted is the lexical verb, like in the case of the first example. Have you been swimming? Yes, I have. Sometimes what is deleted or omitted is one or more auxiliary verbs of the verb phrase. Sometimes the subject of the clause can also get omitted along with some part of the verb phrase. So that is what you see in the second example. What have you been doing? Swimming. The subject and auxiliary verbs have been omitted. The final category is clausal ellipsis. In clausal ellipsis, the entire clause is omitted or deleted. As you can see in this example, the student is omitting the entire clause in responding to an utterance made by the teacher. What is left unsaid in this conversation can be recovered from the discourse context. So next we talk about substitution, which is another strategy associated with grammatical cohesion. What is substitution? Substitution is a process in which a substitute form is used for another language item, phrase or group. So what we do in substitution is we replace one word with another word. So words commonly used in substitution in English include do, one, and the same. So here are some examples, once again from Halliday and Hassan. You think John already knows? I think everybody does. So in this example, does replaces knows. My axe is too blunt. I must get a sharper one. So in this one replaces axe. So the third one is a short dialogue. So in this example, the same replaces two poached eggs on toast. So there are different types of substitution as well. So we have nominal substitution, for which we would use words like one, once, the same. For verbal substitution, we may use do. And then for clausal substitution, we may use the word so. So in this lecture, we have talked about 4 different cohesive devices associated with grammatical cohesion. So in the next lecture, we will talk about lexical cohesion.